What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a preview for Week 7 of the NFL season. I can't believe we're already more than a third of the way through the year, but here we are. So Week 7 in the NFL, getting some good data. If you've never seen this web series before, we're just going to go through position by position, talk about some of the more interesting plays. I'll show you some of the tools that I built. Everything you see is available on dfsondemand.com. And we'll go from there. So let's start like we always do with the quarterbacks. So I'll flip to my cheat sheet here. And what I heard from you guys is you like the projections. So we're going to go back with the projections again as opposed to just a score. Between 1 and 100 is what I was doing for the first couple weeks of the year. But now that we have more data, I think projections are getting better every single week. You guys seem to enjoy them, so let's talk about this a little bit. I've got these sorted by projection, so you can kind of see there's some names up here at the top that are not your usual big names, right? And Aaron Rodgers, I'll get him out of there. He's obviously not playing this week, but there's some names up here. So let's talk about a few of these guys, and we're gonna start with Matt Ryan. I don't really want to make excuses for a league MVP having a down year, but I'll try. Okay. What I will say about Matt Ryan is, first of all, I think he's better than this. I think the Atlanta offense showed us last year that they're better than what they've performed so far this year. And I want you to look at his game logs for this year. So here's Matt Ryan, and we'll go for the whole year. So he's faced Chicago, Green Bay, Detroit, Buffalo, and Miami. Chicago, Green Bay, Detroit, Buffalo, and Miami. Those are all Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Buffalo. Who was the last one? Green Bay. Those are all negative matchups. Half of those teams are bottom, or I guess top 10 defenses in not allowing fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So he's been in a negative matchup all year long. And now, again, he is the MVP, so I don't think that necessarily excuses the fact that he's only scored 20 DraftKings points once. It was exactly 20, and it was week 1 of the season. But I think we can cut him a little bit of slack. And now you're getting an opportunity to buy him against a New England defense that is by far the best matchup you can ask for. I mean, you can see how head and shoulders they are worse than the rest of the league at defending quarterbacks. And if we click on these, you can see, Josh McCown scored 23 points. Jameis Winston scored 21. No one scored less than 21 DraftKings points against New England this season. So no reason to think that trend is going to end when Matt Ryan shows up in New England this week. So it's going to be hard to overlook Matt Ryan. I will be purchasing him. If you notice, my highest ranked quarterback was Dak Prescott. Literally has scored more DraftKings points every week this year. So week 1 he scored, 17.1, goes up to almost 18, 22, 23, and 30. So literally has scored more than the previous week every single week. And I obviously don't think that trend can last forever. But what we have here is a guy who's trending upwards, clearly, gets a matchup with San Francisco. I can show you San Francisco here, who gave up 31 points to, Kirk Cousins last week, 21 to Jacoby Brissett, 23 to Jared Goff a couple weeks ago. So they're a bottom 5 defense against quarterbacks. And, what is this? They've given up at least 20 DraftKings points in each of the last 4 weeks, and it's no murderer's row that they've faced. And now you have a very interesting situation in Dallas. Let's assume Ezekiel Elliott does not play this week. Your options are to rely heavily on either Darren McFadden or Alfred Morris, or let Dak touch the ball as often as possible. I assume the Cowboys would opt for the latter, which is just put the ball in the hands of Dak Prescott as much as possible, let him either win the game for you or let him lose the game for you. Again, I think if Alfred Morris or Darren McFadden, like whoever gets the most touches, they're not going to get as many as Zeke would have gotten, which Jesus could have turned into 30 with how many touches he saw. And I imagine that if they struggle on the ground, they're just going to have to use Dak. They're going to have to use his legs. They're going to have to throw the ball. I just don't see a scenario where his usage or Dak's usage is probably not the highest. I think it's going to be the highest usage he's had all year long. I mentioned Kirk Cousins because Cousins shredded San Francisco last week, but I like him again this week. So here's Kirk Cousins at $6,500, and he pops off the screen at me a little bit. I think he's a little bit riskier, but he has plenty of upside. He's scored at least 29 DraftKings points in 2 out of the last 3 weeks. He's probably more likely to put up a dud than some of these other guys, but just as much upside. Like literally, QB1, QB2 upside on this slate. And he gets a matchup with Philadelphia, who they're going to have a couple extra days to prepare for this. They're coming off the Thursday night game, so they have that going for them, but still allowing a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. Here they are right here. Cam Newton scored 23, Phillip Rivers scored 23, Eli Manning scored 27, all in the last 4 weeks. So Philadelphia has struggled to really stop anyone. And there is a slightly less benefit for, so the Eagles are going from Thursday night to Monday night, which is the super long week. But Washington obviously going to Monday night too, so they would get an extra day of their preparation. So take that for what it's worth, but I think it's a pretty good matchup for Kirk Cousins, who has, I like him in GPPs because of that upside, but there is certainly some level of risk there. All right, running backs. So, a couple of options here. Let's go back to my cheat sheet. And let's look at... Okay. Leonard Fournette, my number 1 projected running back. And it's easy to understand why, right? We talk about Leonard Fournette a lot. Mostly the touches. Le'Veon Bell has more touches, and only Todd Gurley has 1 more. And then it's Leonard Fournette. So he's getting all the touches on a team that's running the ball early and often. He's catching passes. He's doing everything here. This is a really good matchup with Indy. Let's pull up the guys who faced Indy and go to running backs here. All right, so here we go. Whoops. Let's try this. Okay. So Derrick Henry on Monday night last week, with the benefit of a long touchdown run at the end of the game, he scores 24 DraftKings points, but DeMarco Murray had already scored 18 before that. You can see J.D. McKissick ran all over Indy. Duke Johnson scored a bunch of points. David Johnson scored 18 in week 2. Gurley scored 19 in week 1. I mean, this isn't even necessarily a lot of great running backs that they've seen here, but Indy's been shredded constantly, week in and week out. So no reason to think that that's not going to continue. Now they have the short week after playing on Monday night, and they've got to face the workhorse that is Leonard Fournette. That's a really tough place to be if you're Indy, who's just not a particularly good team in general. Okay, here's a guy we probably haven't talked about in a couple weeks, but I'm going to get rid of the position designation, and I'm going to sort by receptions here. Sorry, that was a misclick. So I've got this sorted by receptions. Does not matter what position you play. Here's a guy. Christian McCaffrey, the 5th most receptions in the league across all positions. Okay? Pretty freaking good, huh? So Chicago is interesting here. So okay, let's talk about a little bit about Christian McCaffrey. Not going to get you a ton of touch or a ton of rush attempts, right? Like let's look at him. He's going to rush the ball like 5 times. But they are going to line him up all over the field. 14 targets last week. That's now the 2nd time in the last 4 weeks he's had at least 11 targets. Has finally found the end zone. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, saying there's more upside to Christian McCaffrey because he has not found the end zone yet. And now you get a matchup with Chicago that, on paper, isn't great for running backs. But one, they haven't really faced anyone. And look at some of the names on here. So guys that catch the ball out of the backfield. Le'Veon Bell in week 3 scores 21 DraftKings points. Le'Veon Bell's going to score a lot of points. Jerick McKinnon, who's kind of a dynamic back that, kind of reminds me, they're certainly not similar. Christian McCaffrey does a lot of things that a lot of guys don't do, but these are matchup problems for Chicago, right? These are guys that have the ability to line up in the slot, catch the ball out of the backfield, make guys miss. That seems to be a very difficult challenge for the Chicago Bears this season when they've faced those types of running backs. So I just think as the weeks go on, McCaffrey is much more ingrained in the Panthers offense. He's catching a lot of passes. He's being targeted early and often, and he still has a pretty good price tag. Probably because he's only scored 2 touchdowns, but those are fluky and pretty volatile in general. So continue to buy on Christian McCaffrey for the time being. And then outside of that, I like the upside of Jordan Howard. All right, so here's Jordan Howard, 36 rush attempts last week. No, I do not think he's going to get 36 rush attempts every single week, but he is a workhorse on this Chicago team. And he's facing Carolina, which, again, you have to kind of be careful here. When you come into the lobby and you look for Jordan Howard and you see, okay, this is what the casual fan does. They say, okay, he's in a bad matchup with Carolina, and you stay away. And the pricing is kind of includes that too, right? Like, bad matchup for Jordan Howard, price him $6,400. You got to look a little bit deeper than that. Let's go to running backs and Carolina here. They haven't really faced anyone. Okay? Carlos Hyde, LaShawn McCoy, the 3-headed monster that at the time for New Orleans was kind of a mess. New England, who doesn't really have a lead back. Detroit, who doesn't really have a lead back. Philly, who they don't really have a lead back anymore. I mean, it's just like they haven't faced someone who's going to ram 22 rushes down their throats and see what happens. So I'll be interested to see how this plays out with Jordan Howard probably seeing a ton of touches against this Carolina defense. All right, wide receivers. Of these elite guys, let's scroll up. Of these elite guys, Antonio Brown, it's so hard to find a guy who is going to see the amount of targets that Antonio Brown does. Okay, head and shoulders above the rest of the league in targets. My number 1 projected wide receiver. He gets a Cincinnati team that. Let's see if I can flip over here. Here's Cincy. Okay, so here's what's interesting. So I have Cincy as a bottom 8 defense against wide receivers. The DraftKings lobby has him as the 5th best, which is strange. I don't know how they're calculating this. There's always a little bit of discrepancies really between site and site, especially because how you count it. Sometimes I filter mine based on guys who didn't take zeros, basically guys who played. I usually filter those guys out if you didn't play or if you didn't receive a target or a reception or something like that. So it can be 1 or 2 spots off from time to time. This is a big difference. I don't know what they're calculating, but I can just show you the game logs for guys against Cincy here. And Jordy shredded them. Let's see here. Macklin, Hopkins, a lot of double-digit games in here that have kind of kept them afloat. I'm not sure what the disconnect is. I'll look into that and tweet it out if I find something that it is. But really, it's a matter of Antonio Brown, who, do they throw targets in here? Yeah, okay. 29 targets over the last 2 weeks, 300-plus yards. He can get loose at any time. I actually think it's interesting he's only scored 2 touchdowns this year. I'm actually thinking there's more upside to Antonio Brown. Okay, 6 weeks, 2 touchdowns. He's probably going to end up scoring at a higher pace than that. And just the yardage and the targets are going to be nearly impossible to replicate. And with the fact that he has this poor designation, like, Antonio Brown's matchup proof, guys. Like, it doesn't matter who he's playing. Maybe that drives his ownership down a little bit. Next up is Michael Crabtree. So outside of 1 week, right? Outside of the week that he kind of laid an egg, left the game early with an injury, Crabtree's been awesome. Okay, so we throw out week 3 against Washington, and here's Michael Crabtree, who now has 5 touchdowns on the year. Let me see if I can find what he's done. Let's go to his game logs. Okay, so scored at least 17 DraftKings points in 3 out of his last 4. If you throw out, so we can do this. So he's still averaging, where is he at here? Let's go back one more. Week 1, week 2, there we go. Okay, so I mean, you can see the upside is there. He actually has a pretty good floor. I mean, we literally just tossing out one game. Kansas City is such an interesting matchup here. So let me see if I can find this. Here's Kansas City. Okay. Kansas City has allowed at least one opposing wide receiver, to score 19 or more DraftKings points in 5 out of 6 games this year. I mean, you can see how big these numbers are. Amendola got him for 19 in week 1. Week 2, Alshon got him for 22. Week 3, Travis Benjamin got him for 19. Like, week 4 against Washington, Terrell Pryor scored 16. That was the only week they didn't give up one receiver having 19 points. Then Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins go nuts, and Antonio Brown does his thing last week. So clearly a trend here that someone is likely to go off. Michael Crabtree appears to be that guy now that Derek Carr's back. It's going to be his second week playing. We didn't see much movement on Crabtree's price, so maybe I have that handy. Okay, so here we go. So Crabtree, 3 weeks ago was $7,400, drops down to $6,400. Drops down to $5,800. Now you get Derek Carr back. You get 2 good weeks in a row, a good matchup, and he's still only 61. So that price, I assume, is going to be rising pretty rapidly again, like it was a few weeks ago. But right now we get to buy it at $6,100. And then Davante Adams is the last guy I want to talk about here. So I have this sorted by targets again. Davante Adams, 8th most targets in the league at only $5,800. Feels like a pretty good buy. It was interesting because he had 10 targets last week, I believe. So here you go. 10 targets last week, and we know Aaron Rodgers is out, right? Like, I'm not stupid. But all 10 of these targets come from Brett Hundley, who's going to be filling in this week and for the foreseeable future. What you tend to find with a lot of these young quarterbacks is that they find someone they like and they rely on them constantly. It's who they trust the most. Now, we've seen one game from Brett Hundley. We don't know how that's going to shake out. I'll give you a couple of examples. Jameis Winston and Mike Evans. Clearly, if you had Mike Evans, you'd throw the ball up to him a lot, but Winston does it at an extraordinary rate, especially when he's under pressure. When he's under pressure, he throws it to Winston like 33% of the time. That's an indication that he trusts that receiver. Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz, similar story. Like, when he's under pressure, Wentz throws it to Ertz. Ertz is like the first guy he looks at. It's who he trusts. If Hundley starts to develop that type of relationship with any of his wide receivers, I'm gonna want to know who it is. But Davante Adams gets 10 targets last week. He's now found the end zone 4 times in the last 3 weeks. It's never going to be easy for a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback to come in and start in the NFL, but Hundley gets a full week to prepare at home against a New Orleans defense that is just begging to be shredded. So I'm not staying away just because Aaron Rodgers is not here. I think there's a lot of ingredients that could add up to something pretty nice for the Packers in general, and certainly Davante Adams. And then, I mean, the tight end position is so brutal week in and week out. It's really a matter of what do you want to do. Do you want to pay for one of the top guys, or do you want to take any of the cheap flyers? I've opted to pay up this year for the most part, and it's turned out pretty well. We've rostered Zach Ertz. If you watch this, I talk about him every single week. He's there again. I've rostered Zach Ertz quite a bit. I think Gronk, Ertz, and Kelsey are all certainly great options. So I don't need to beat those into your head. I would have as much exposure as possible. I'll give you a couple of others. We've talked about Evan Ingram in the past. He found the end zone again. But how about someone new, which is Cameron Brate? So here's Brate, who now averaging 17.1 DraftKings points over the course of the last 4 weeks. He's caught a touchdown in all of those. He's developing into a real red zone threat for Jameis Winston. We know Winston's not afraid to sling the ball around, and Cameron Brate is really catching his attention down closer to the end zone. So a really good trend here at a very difficult, thin position, and a guy who's only $4,700. So Cameron Brate is certainly going to be in some significant portion of my lineups this week, mostly due to this position, but he seems to be a really good option. If you're more desperate, we talked about Austin Seferian-Jenkins last week. He had a great game and actually probably got screwed out on a touchdown, which might have cost you some money. But you can go for another Austin, which is Austin Hooper. So, again, for guys that are flyers like this, looking for kind of small sample size, just small trends, which would be the 16 targets he's seen over the course of the last 2 weeks. This is a game that could easily turn into a shootout, New England versus Atlanta. Both high-powered offenses. New England's defense, absolutely brutal. Austin Hooper is a guy who's trending upwards in terms of looks from his quarterback, and he's priced at only $4,100. I wouldn't be particularly thrilled to play him, but I could understand why you'd roster him. Okay, that's it. That's the Week 7 preview. Give me a shout. Let me know who you guys are interested in or who you're not interested in. You can either tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand, or leave a comment below. Talk to you guys soon, and good luck.